Picture this: America's most beloved late-night host, the man who made an entire nation laugh for 3 decades, sitting across from a guest he absolutely couldn't stand. The cameras are rolling, millions are watching, and Johnny Carson has to pretend everything is perfect. But behind those twinkling eyes and that trademark smile, there's a simmering frustration, sometimes even contempt. For 30 years, Carson was the undisputed king of late-night television, the gatekeeper who could make or break careers with a single appearance on The Tonight Show. But what happened when the king met guests he genuinely despised? What made this master of composure lose his patience? Was it ego clashing with ego, or something far more personal? From Hollywood legends who treated his show like their personal stage to comedy icons who betrayed his trust, some stars didn't just rub Carson the wrong way, they crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. These weren't just awkward interviews that made for uncomfortable television. These were feuds that lasted decades, grudges that outlived careers, and in some cases, relationships that were destroyed forever. The fascinating part: Carson almost never let it show on camera. He was too professional, too skilled at his craft. But behind the scenes, the stories tell a different tale entirely. So what really happened when America's favorite host faced the guests he secretly couldn't stand? Let's pull back the curtain on the real drama, the hidden tension, and the feuds that Johnny Carson took with him to the grave. Johnny Carson was born in 1925 in small-town Iowa and grew up in Nebraska, a quiet kid fascinated by magic tricks who performed at local events as the Great Carson. After serving in the Navy during World War II, he studied journalism and broadcasting at the University of Nebraska, already working in radio before he graduated. His path to stardom wasn't instant. He started at small radio stations, moved to Los Angeles, and slowly worked his way up through local television and writing gigs. His breakthrough came when he filled in for an injured Red Skelton during a live broadcast and impressed everyone with his natural comic timing. This led to hosting opportunities, including the game show Who Do You Trust?, where his chemistry with guests caught NBC's attention. In 1962, Carson took over The Tonight Show from Jack Paar, and though he was nervous at first, his relaxed style and sharp wit quickly made him a sensation. For 3 decades, he ruled late-night television, launching the career of countless comedians and becoming a cultural institution. But beneath all that success and those smooth monologues, Carson had strong opinions about his guests, and some of them he genuinely couldn't stand. Bob Hope was a comedy giant long before Carson became famous, a Hollywood legend known for his USO tours and perfectly timed jokes. But when Hope appeared on The Tonight Show, something felt off. The problem was their completely different approaches to comedy. Hope came from an era of scripted performances, relying on pre-written jokes and cue cards, treating every appearance like a rehearsed routine. Carson, however, thrived on spontaneity and natural conversation. He wanted genuine moments, unpredictable laughs, real chemistry with his guests. When Hope sat down, the interview often felt stiff and mechanical because Hope would simply deliver his prepared material, expecting Carson to set him up like a straight man in a comedy act. Carson found this incredibly boring and frustrating. Making matters worse, Hope's team would send lists of topics and jokes in advance, essentially treating Carson like a prop rather than letting him control his own show. There was also pressure from NBC to book Hope because he was such a big star, even when he didn't have anything particularly interesting to discuss. Many of Hope's appearances felt more like commercials for his latest projects than actual conversations. Carson remained professional on camera and never publicly insulted Hope, but behind the scenes he reportedly found these interviews exhausting. Over time, Hope's appearances became less frequent, and Carson seemed quietly relieved. The fallout with Joan Rivers was perhaps the most painful betrayal of Carson's career. In the early days, Carson was Rivers' biggest champion. He gave her her first major break on The Tonight Show in 1965, when few shows would book female comics, recognizing her sharp, edgy humor. Over 20 years, she became his favorite guest and most frequent guest host, with many believing Carson was grooming her as a potential successor. Then came 1986. Rivers secretly negotiated with Fox to host her own late-night show in direct competition with Carson. The real knife in the back wasn't the competition itself, it was that she never told him. Carson learned about it through the media like everyone else. To Carson, this was unforgivable. He had made her famous, given her opportunities when nobody else would, and she repaid him by going behind his back to compete against him. In the tight-knit world of late-night television, there was an unwritten rule. You don't compete against your mentor without talking to them first. Carson immediately cut all ties. He refused her calls, banned her from guest hosting, and ensured she would never appear on The Tonight Show again. Even after Carson retired in 1992, Jay Leno continued the ban out of respect. Rivers didn't return to the show until 2014, nearly 30 years later, when Jimmy Fallon took over. Rivers always maintained she had to seize the opportunity for her career, but admitted she mishandled how she told Carson. The feud haunted her for decades. For Carson, it was about trust and loyalty, values he held sacred in an industry he knew could be ruthless. Wayne Newton started as the target of Carson's gentle jokes about his flashy Las Vegas performances, his high voice, and his dramatic stage presence. Most celebrities played along with Carson's humor, understanding it was part of the show. But Newton didn't find it funny. He took the constant teasing personally, and his resentment grew over time. Then Newton did something almost unheard of. He confronted Carson face to face. Using his Las Vegas connections and considerable influence, Newton reportedly stormed into Carson's office. According to witnesses, Newton physically intimidated Carson, getting very close and making it clear the jokes needed to stop, hinting there could be serious consequences if they continued. This shocked Carson, who wasn't accustomed to such aggressive confrontations. While Carson could handle verbal sparring brilliantly, physical intimidation was something else entirely. The encounter reportedly left Carson shaken. After this, Carson noticeably reduced his Newton jokes, though the damage to their relationship was permanent. Whenever Newton appeared on the show afterward, the atmosphere was tense. Carson remained professional on camera, but behind the scenes he no longer enjoyed having Newton as a guest. It was one of the rare times Carson's humor backfired on him. Fred Rogers presented a different challenge entirely. The gentle host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood wasn't someone Carson disliked. He was simply impossible to interview using Carson's usual comedic approach. Rogers spoke slowly and thoughtfully about childhood development and emotions, subjects that didn't lend themselves to Carson's quick-witted banter. Carson couldn't tease Rogers without looking like a bully picking on television's kindest man. At the same time, Rogers' earnest, serious answers about children's education gave Carson little material to work with. Their interviews became famously awkward. When Carson sarcastically asked if Rogers was as nice as that guy on TV, Rogers sincerely responded that he tried to be. When Carson joked about Rogers changing into sneakers on his show, Rogers gave such a serious explanation about children's comfort that the audience laughed at the mismatch of tones. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly found these interviews frustrating because Rogers created what some called a conversational dead zone, where Carson's humor couldn't flourish. It wasn't personal dislike, it was simply two opposite approaches to television that could never quite mesh. Charlton Heston carried himself with the solemn dignity of a Hollywood titan, speaking in the same grand dramatic tones he used in biblical epics. When Carson tried to lighten the mood with jokes, Heston would respond with intense, lengthy answers about his craft or conservative political views. What Carson hoped would be entertaining often turned into a solemn lecture. Politics also played a role, especially when Heston became president of the National Rifle Association. Carson, who generally avoided heated political debates, would occasionally poke fun at Heston's rigid stances. But Heston wasn't the type to laugh at himself or engage in playful back and forth. Additionally, Heston had a habit of turning interviews into long-winded monologues, leaving Carson with little to do but nod along. For a host who prided himself on keeping energy high and laughs coming, Heston's unshakable seriousness was draining. Over time, Carson found these appearances exhausting, as their approaches to entertainment remained fundamentally incompatible. Frank Sinatra was one of the most powerful entertainers of all time, charming but demanding and occasionally volatile. Carson respected Sinatra's legendary status, but wasn't willing to let anyone disrupt his show or undermine his authority as host. Sinatra would sometimes arrive late with his intimidating Rat Pack entourage, creating backstage chaos. More troubling was his habit of disregarding the show's structure. In one famous incident, Sinatra suddenly walked onto stage during Carson's opening monologue, unannounced and uninvited, clearly making a power move. Carson handled it gracefully on camera, but behind the scenes this behavior frustrated him deeply. Sinatra also had a temper. If he didn't like a question or felt disrespected, he could become cold or confrontational. This put Carson in a difficult position, needing to maintain control without creating an uncomfortable situation. Money became another sore point, as Sinatra demanded extremely high appearance fees. Carson believed no guest was bigger than the show itself, while Sinatra clearly saw himself as the exception. Despite the friction, Carson continued booking Sinatra because he was ratings gold. Their relationship was one of mutual professional respect, mixed with private frustration. Two entertainment kings who never quite agreed on who should be calling the shots. Tony Curtis had a larger-than-life personality that clashed with Carson's carefully controlled format. Curtis loved being center stage and would launch into long, meandering stories about his Hollywood glory days. While entertaining, these tales left little room for Carson's trademark humor or interview style. Curtis delivered monologues, rather than engaging in conversation, treating the interview as a stage for his reminiscences. This left Carson in the unusual position of being talked at, rather than conversing with his guest. Curtis also name-dropped excessively, constantly reminding viewers of famous co-stars and friendships. This self-promotional style grated on Carson, who valued subtlety and wit. There were moments when Carson's facial expressions made clear his patience was wearing thin. Adding to the tension was Curtis's unpredictable energy, some nights charming, other nights oddly intense or strangely flirtatious, creating awkward moments. Behind the scenes, Carson found Curtis exhausting to interview, the kind of guest requiring extra work to keep segments on track. Their interviews gradually became less frequent as Carson preferred guests who better matched his conversational style. The fundamental issue was simple. Tony Curtis always wanted to be the star, but on The Tonight Show, there was only room for one star, and his name was Johnny Carson.